Hey everyone, this is Dr. Jennifer McDevitt of New Jersey City University's Institute for Dispute Resolution. In today's episode of the Connecting Bridges and Borders series, I'm going to be chatting with Bob McDevitt, the president of Local 54 and national vice president of the 300,000 member Unite Here Hospitality Union. And yes, there is a relation. Today's guest also happens to be my father. So without further ado, let's get started.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate you taking an interest in our situation in Atlantic City.
Well, thank you for taking the time to speak with me and share your experiences with our audience today. So can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and the union you represent?
Well, the union I represent, Unite Here, is a hospitality union. By that, there are three basic areas where we represent workers. We represent them in casino hotels around the country. We represent them in hotels around the country, and also food service, which could be stadium and arena, concession workers, airports where people buy food, or Hudson News and places like that. If you travel in airport, a lot of them are our members, and also in-flight feeding kitchens. So the kitchens that make the food that go on the planes, most of those workers around the country are our members. And lastly, corporate cafeterias. One of our biggest and newest employers is Google. They've worked with us, and a lot of our members are joining the union, and they're working in the cafeterias at Google and a lot of the other Silicon Valley companies, not just in the Silicon Valley though, on the East and West Coast. So we were up until a while ago a very vibrant and very well-employed union. At the moment now, we're 95% unemployed. So the only people that are working in our union nationally are working in Army bases where they do the cafeteria work. They're working at Yale, where the Yale is still operating and they're paying their employees, and we have members there. And lastly, for Disney, both Disneyland and Disney World continue to pay our employees even though they're closed. Everybody else is, for all intents and purposes, laid off.
Okay, so that's the macro level picture referring to the whole union Unite Here, for which you're the national vice president, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let's zoom in a little bit to your local union, of which you're the president. So that's Local 54 of Unite Here. And tell us a little bit about where that's at and what the economy is based on in that area.
Well, we're mainly in Atlantic City. We have about 11,000 members in South Jersey, Southern New Jersey, and 9 southern counties. About 10,000 of those workers work in Atlantic City casinos. The rest work in various hotels. They work at Six Flags Great Adventure. They work in cafeterias at College of New Jersey and some other educational institutions and things like that. So, but the main bulk of our membership is working in casinos in Atlantic City and are currently laid off.
Okay, and when did the casinos close?
Well, we worked through the weekend of March 14th, and at 8 p.m. on March 16th, we were closed. We had about a 12 hours notice prior to closing. So it was a very big shock to us, because around the country there had been a severe decline in occupancy rates of hotels, say in New York, Seattle, Chicago, whatnot. And their occupancy rates were down to about 10% across the country by that weekend. But in Atlantic City, because we're a drive-in market, we were still fairly busy. So we came to a lurching stop with everyone laid off at the same time, as opposed to many of the other locals around the country where people were furloughed because business was down. It sort of was a slower 3 or 4 week occurrence. In Atlantic City, it just came to a complete stop all at the same time, which was a real jolt to our members.
Okay, and were they completely closed down? Were any of the restaurants allowed to do
100%.
to-go orders? 100%.
Everything closed down. 8 o'clock on March 16th, everything was closed. So that was the last time our workers actually were on property and working.
Okay, and so what kind of effects has this had on the economy of Atlantic City and on the employees as well?
Well, it's not just Atlantic City. Atlantic County, if people can imagine the old style steel mill town from the 1930s and 1940s, where in places like Western Pennsylvania, you had a big steel mill and the entire area made their income from working in the steel mill or working in support businesses like restaurants and bars and suppliers. Well, that's basically the case of Atlantic City. We're a one industry county, and we have about 300,000 people in the county. And on March 16th, 26,000 people were put out of work, not just my 10,000 members, but the other 16,000 non-union workers were also put out of work, which basically cascaded into probably 80% of the county is not working, which is a dramatic impact on everything here, much more so than any other jurisdiction in our union.
Okay, and what is being done on behalf of the workers? Have they received any kind of benefits or packages?
Well, that's a good question, and they fall into different buckets, right? So we have a group of workers that are very experienced in unemployment and knew how to apply for it, because let me go back a second. All the employers in Atlantic City gave an additional 2 weeks pay past the closing. And El Dorado, which owns Tropicana, gave 4 weeks of pay. So our members who are familiar with unemployment, they had no problem. They signed up at the right time, and they immediately were eligible after their last paycheck. We had a large group. That's first group. Didn't really need a lot of work, knew what they were doing. But a very large portion of our workforce fell into two other buckets. One is people who have no experience with this. A lot of them are challenged because of their language, and for all the efforts that the state makes, the language capabilities are not that great. I mean, Spanish is a big thing, but it's also Gujarati from India. It's Bengali. It's about 30 different languages, and they have a hard time accessing. And then there's the third group, which are workers, and this is a group that no one really thought about. They're becoming more and more an issue right now. The third group are workers who had exhausted their unemployment over the wintertime, which is very common in the hospitality industry, not just in Atlantic City, but all over the state. In the restaurant industry in Jersey City and Hoboken and the hotels. When in the wintertime, it's slower, so they collect partial unemployment. By the end of the winter, they're usually down to zero in unemployment, but then they go back to work in April and they re-up everything, and by the time the winter comes again, they go back. The problem is those workers at this time were caught in the crosshairs of this. So they literally had no unemployment benefits available when this happened. And the other piece of that was the state had not worked out with the federal government the $600 payment per week that they were entitled to. So they're basically just this week getting access to that $600. So they've been without a paycheck for up to 6 weeks with no other help at all, no other income. So there's a lot of desperation in that group of people, and it's a group that spans the entire state of New Jersey. And some of them are undocumented, and they're not even going to get a benefit. And people aren't talking about those folks. We're doing our best to help them. Our staff, since March 16th, has processed or helped process 3,700 unemployment claims from our members remotely. So the member would call in. They would be put in a queue, and various people from my staff who have been trained by my secretary treasurer, Don DiCaprio, took the calls, some of them by language, some of them just in random, and they worked through the problems that they had with getting the unemployment on their laptop while they were talking to the member on the phone, because we can't had people coming into the union hall because of the coronavirus restrictions. So it was very complicated. We worked through 3,700 different calls in the last 5 weeks. So most of them have been processed, but there's still a large group out there that are still stuck, and we're doing our best to help them as well.
Okay, that's a lot of people. So that was about a month that they didn't have any access to the unemployment.
Right, right. And we did a giveaway with the food bank. The local food bank were very good. The food bank in South Jersey are excellent, and we've worked with them before during strikes and other things like Sandy relief. Well, we did it at a mall, a former mall out in Egg Harbor Township. We did a drive up, opened the trunk, put the box in the trunk. It was 2 weeks worth of food. It was 40 meals worth of food, and we had 1,500 available, and they went in 2.5 hours, and there were probably more than that who didn't get access to food. The traffic tie up from Pleasantville to the mall was 2 miles. And I was in the back of that because I tried to get in at 10 o'clock in the morning. It opened at 9:30, but there was already a conga line of people because they're desperate. They don't have any money to buy food. So they're going to any source that they can. And this was not just our members. This was folks who were non-union people as well as union people. They were just really in a bad way. They were very appreciative and very nice, but you could tell that they're desperate. And that's a very disturbing development for me. I've never seen anything like that in my life in this part of New Jersey. I've lived here for the better part of 58 years.
Okay, so this has been going on for a while. We're going to be in May in a couple of days now. Have you heard of any talk of some of these restaurants and casinos and things starting to open with social distancing measures in place, or what has been going on?
Well, the governor just released, I haven't seen it yet, his reopening plan. I haven't, so I can't comment because I haven't seen it, but I mean, there's a lot of problems fundamentally with the reopening. Well, let me just backtrack. One of the big problems that we've encountered, besides the unemployment and the other issues we're dealing with, is that, our grievance and arbitration process has come to a complete halt. So our members who were terminated or had discipline, had grievances scheduled, all that's been scheduled out and postponed because potential arbitrators are not taking anything right now, and the companies have laid off all their employees, so there's no grievance department or human resources department from the company to sit down and meet with. So we've got a sizable hundreds of members that are in limbo right now, waiting to have their cases adjudicated.
Has there been any talks of online arbitration or another kind of conflict resolution service that could be delivered through an online platform to expedite things so it's not so backlogged in the future when the casinos and the restaurants and everything open again?
That hasn't happened yet. Again, the casinos, they laid everyone off, so there's no one to call on the other end to set something like that up because they've been laid off. I think if it goes on much longer, we're going to contact the heads of the companies and ask them about this, how we can get this restored. One of the things that takes a little relief off it is there's no job to go back to yet. So, it's not like they're missing work because they're out of work. So it's sort of like a chicken and an egg thing. But we would like to get things back on track so we don't have this giant, like a pig going through a python of cases that we have to deal with all at the same time, because no one has that capability, which will make them, drag out even longer, which is something that we try and avoid.
Okay, so when the different institutes do open again, we've got potentially a backlog of arbitrations and grievances. Given the curve and everything, so say the curve has been flattened and things start to open again, what is the expectation in terms of the consumers? Do you anticipate that they'll return to gambling and we'll see a huge influx of people in the restaurants and the casinos and the different places that you've mentioned within your local union and the different facilities across the country?
Right. Well, I think once we get past the actual reopening, which I think is going to be a little bumpy because um, there's going to be some negotiation with the industry and the state on what the reopening plan is. There's been talk about limiting, like typically at a blackjack table, you have 6 people playing. That may be reduced to 3. When you're sitting at a slot machine, they may close every other slot machine so there's distancing and stuff. That's got to be worked out between the state and the casinos because the casinos can't open without the state's sanction. So that's going to be a little bit of a tussle, I think. But once we work through that, I think that Atlantic City, and there's some other jurisdictions that are more regional in nature and local in nature, like the Philadelphia market, which has 4 casinos, and down in the Mid-South in New Orleans and Biloxi, Mississippi, there's a fairly large concentration of casinos that's regional. I think that our business will come back much faster than the hotel convention and business uh, meetings in places like San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago. I think that will take a much longer period of time because of scheduling. It's most of that's business, and I think one of the things that we'll find because of the extensive use of Zoom and Life Size and other platforms is that a lot of the smaller business meetings aren't going to take place anymore in hotels. They'll take place on the internet because people are getting used to the new technology. People like myself who weren't children when this technology started to develop, I'm using it constantly every day on 3 different platforms. So I think that's going to change the nature of the business. But long term, I think it will come back in the big cities. But the third piece of that is, are people working in airline catering and airports and Amtrak, or we have members on Amtrak. That's gonna be a longer recovery because you know business business meetings and conventions are typically scheduled at the minimum a year out. So everything pretty much is canceled right now through to June. If this goes on much further, you'll see more cancellations. I mean, there could not be anything substantial in a city like New York until the summer of next year. So those hotel workers, although they'll be able to work, there's not going to be the volume of customers, and there won't be as many people in the hotel towers staying in hotels, so less housekeepers will work, and the restaurants won't open, or they'll be on restricted hours. I think it's going to be months minimum to recover back to anything like where we were in the beginning of March, in the whole country. So it could be till spring of next year before a lot of people are back on a 40-hour work week.
Okay. And would you consider that it could be a silver lining that with this use of Zoom and Life Size and the other applications, now these businesses are going to be saving money and not having to fly their employees from place to place to go congregate in the center, a business convention center, or wherever it might be, and the meals and the expenses? So could that help the union and the various businesses to, save money that it might have spent in the past and potentially help expedite the ultimate recovery?
Well, I mean, we'll use it more in the union, but I don't see it. It's not that big of a cost driver in our union because we typically are very conservative with our money and we don't meet more than a day and a half with our committee, our executive committee meetings and things like that. So travel and lodging has never been a especially large piece of our business that we do. But other companies, I think it's going to have a dramatic impact, and that's going to have an impact on the hotel industry. You know, those meetings of 25 to 50 people that they may have held at the Hilton in New York, they'll just do it on the internet. So the catering and convention business is going to have to evolve, because there's going to be issues with business, even once we're fully in recovery.
Okay, and as somebody who represents the union workers, do you have any kind of contingency plan, or how do you anticipate helping these individuals when they come forth in the future and maybe they don't have a job? What kind of skills or trainings or other opportunities might you have lined up or be sort of brainstorming about at this point?
Well, we haven't gotten to that point yet, honestly, because we're just trying to get through the economic impact that we're in the middle of. We know that that's coming down the road, but that's something I think we're gonna brainstorm about once our industries are opened again, because at that point we'll have a real idea of what kind of recovery there's going to be. If you take, for instance, in New Jersey, in Atlantic City, if you take a casino like the Borgata, which is a very big casino, 2,800 hotel rooms, on the day that casino opens, there's going to be no people in the building. There's going to be no reservations. So the business will be open, but the 400 housekeepers that clean the rooms will not all be working. So once we get to that point, we'll be able to see what the trend is here at the local and also around the country on where we think the recovery is going to end and who's going to be left over. It's all really, conjecture at this point until we get some real numbers.
Okay, and when do you personally think, if you could choose, when do you think the casinos should reopen? Do you think that we should take a more conservative approach, or should we open sooner than later?
That's a difficult question to ask or to answer. Personally, I, as a person who lives in South Jersey, that lives in Atlantic County, whose industry was shut down March 16th, and still in the county we have a very low amount of exposure to COVID-19. The logic of closing casinos was that they're a breeding ground for spreading this disease, and that certainly hasn't borne itself out in the number of actual people who have gotten this virus in Atlantic County. It's still around 600 people. Our number per 100,000 is very low. It's as low as Salem County, almost as low as Salem County, which is a very rural county. So, I think they should have been closed. I don't want people to misunderstand me, but the threat clearly was not as bad as the perception of the threat was, because we don't have the medical evidence to prove that actually it was spread extensively in the casinos. And bear in mind, over half of our customer base is from the New York metro area. So they're exactly from the place where is the epicenter of this pandemic. And we still have low numbers. So, I personally, I think that it would need to be addressed in this. And I don't believe that the feds or the state governments will have a stomach for this. But when they talk about the new normal, people think about, a restaurant that had 100 seats is now going to have 70 seats. Maybe that's true. But what do you do about Broadway? You tell a theater that had 1,000 seats, they now have 300. You take all the seats out. What do you say to United Airlines or American Airlines or Delta? That 737 that had 140 seats on it, now you can only have 80. And lastly, what do you do about public transportation? Because the reality is, it's clear to me, if you look at Southern Connecticut, Long Island, North Jersey, where you reside, up in, these commuter areas into Manhattan, the whole reason why this happened was because people take public transportation. And I know from my own experience of taking it up in New York, I had no problem with it. But during rush hour, there's no seats on anything, and there's people literally in each other's face. And I think how we deal with that is the ultimate question, because you can talk about messing around with restaurants and messing around with other things, but you're basically talking about closing down the entire theater industry in the United States. If you're talking about social distancing, staying permanently, and you're talking about, I don't know what they do with public transit, where I got to add 10 train cars to every train, or where they have people monitoring how many people are on each train. I mean, those are the realities that I think people aren't really thinking about right now. They're thinking about restaurants and things like that. And I think it's the arguments about this are going to be much more uh, uh, robust when it comes to the things I just mentioned.
Okay. Yeah, those are all definitely good points. The trains to New York from Jersey City and
Well,
Newark and
personally.
Harrison. Yeah, they're standing room only, squished together, and they're already totally full when they're running every few minutes currently. So there are definitely a lot of long-term things that need to be considered.
And it's a shame, because that's a good thing in the sense of the environment and everything else, because New York, the metro area, uses mass transit at a much higher rate than any other city in the country. So I mean, it's a good thing, but in this situation, it could be something that is a real problem. And I don't know what the answer is, other than, we've been through pandemics before, we've been through things before, and things change for a while, and then they go back to where they were. And I don't think you're going to see people walk around masks on in any great numbers 5 years from now. I think people get tired of it and will stop doing it. So I think we got to be very careful about how we do that. And it's going to affect the casinos, right? I think one of the things that we're going to need to do in our industry is to make sure every room is cleaned every day, that there's a customer. Because right now, a lot of the industry, especially the hotel industry, but also Caesars Entertainment, they do this phony green program. So they put a little card in the room saying, hey, you want to save the environment, reuse your towels, and don't get your room clean. Don't have the sheets changed. And they actually promote this at the front desk when you check in, and they'll give you points, or they'll give you a $5 or a $10 coupon for breakfast in the coffee shop the next day if you turn down service and don't want service. Well, in a situation of a pandemic, that is not exactly the way that people should be treating these rooms. They've got to be cleaned out every single day. So that's something that we're dealing with on the state level. Our union has contacted Senator Sweeney, who's the president of the Senate, and we have a piece of legislation that we'd like them to consider, requiring all the hotels to to not allow a person to stay in a room 3 days and only have it clean one day. Every day that there's a person in a room, we believe those rooms should be clean, because it has nothing to do with the environment. It has everything to do with laying off housekeepers and not paying for sheets and towels to be washed. It's got nothing to do with the environment. The whole thing's a fraud, and it's been that way for a decade.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely something I wouldn't have even considered had you not brought it up. And I'm sure there's so many other measures that are being discussed behind the scenes about how to keep it clean and hygienic so that somebody doesn't inadvertently spread the virus to another person, even if within someone's own room, that it were carried on someone's clothes and got to them and the next day. So do you have anything else that you would like to add for our audience before we wrap up for today?
Well, yeah, I think your question about the arbitration and grievance process is something I didn't give a lot of thought to. But as I think about it, as we're talking, I think there's a great opportunity to use this technology in the way that it's being expanded exponentially with the medical field right now. Because like they're up until this pandemic, a doctor had to be credentialed in New York in order to do a video meeting with a patient in New Jersey. You know, you had to have credential everywhere. I think that's going to change. And I think and as I think about the cost of an arbitrator coming, you know, the travel costs, which sometimes include hotel rooms and always includes car or air or whatever travel, that those costs can be abated by perfecting this. It can't just be, I can't think that it would be helpful to use certain members as guinea pigs, but if we can make this a more intimate kind of thing, then I think there is a possibility that we could have arbitrators talking like we are right now on a platform and have the whole thing adjudicated online. So I do think that there's an ability to have savings there.
Okay, yeah, so it's all in the development. I've heard a lot of talk of arbitration and mediation being conducted online. So hopefully all of the brightest minds are together working on the technology needed to make sure that these kind of informal dispute resolution processes are able to include everybody in a way that makes everyone feel equal and that they're getting justice through their systems when the education goes through.
Yeah. And I think it really, the responsibility here falls on the actual arbitrators, that group of people who do conflict resolution. They're going to need to drive this, because the union and the companies are going to try and create advantages under this system because it's just a natural thing for us to do. We always want an edge. And the actual third party impartial person, that group of people and that industry, I think, is going to need to weigh heavily on the procedures of this. Because if it's left to the union and the company, I think you're just going to have two sides squabbling over things that really just concern about them getting an upper hand, as opposed to having a fair hearing. So I would look to that, you know, that group of people, the ones that we employ to do that, or we pay to do that. They need to speak up and start meeting themselves about putting this on the paper so people can actually look at it and try and be objective.
Okay, yeah, and I believe that there's a lot of technology and processes that are being developed as we speak. So
yeah,
in a few months, maybe even sooner, there will be a good offering and, as you mentioned, cost saving method of doing this.
Well, I think it's going to have a dramatic. This is the long-term effect here is going to be, there's going to be a lot more people working from home, legitimately working from home, much more so than before this started. I think that's going to be the big takeaway. I think all the other social distancing stuff will fade away over time. Some of it's not manageable, as I talked about, you know, with those different industries. So, but there will be a lot more people working from home. I don't know what that means. I don't know what the outcome is of that, or how it affects people's wages, but clearly a lot more can be done than we previously thought, because I'm using this literally every day, multiple times a day, and as are my whole staff, and we're getting the work done.
Okay, yeah, so more people working from home, definitely, but there could be cost saving benefits to that.
Oh,
and
yeah.
there could be more opportunities for people who maybe have to pursue an online degree or something because a career or job that they once had might not be as essential as it was before. So
Right.
this technology is at the same time going to help us sort of jumpstart and hopefully be a beacon of hope in the future and help us transform things into a
I think
positive
so.
way.
I think so. I mean, if one example that I would give, one of the industry leaders in the airline industry is Southwest Airlines. They're very smart about what they do. And, you know, a decade ago, when all the other airlines were offshoring their customer service um, call centers, they were moving them to the Philippines and other countries in Asia. What Southwest did was they took a geographical area in Utah, and where there's a lot of women that don't work and they're stay-at-home mothers because they're Mormon and it's a different kind of a tradition. And they hired these women to do customer service from their kitchen. And so when the calls came in to Southwest for customer service or booking tickets and all that kind of stuff, you got a person in Utah who had perfect English, and they did it right from their kitchen table. And meanwhile, everywhere else they were going all over the world to do this, and it cost them less money for Southwest to do that. So there's ways to look at this technology, I think, that I'm not certainly capable of thinking of, but smart people will figure out how to make this work and work in a positive way, because that was good for Southwest, it was good for those women, and it was good for the customers.
It's good to look at it in a positive light, because in moments where it seems so difficult and we just want to go outside, it's springtime, everyone wants to be out there, just kind of looking forward to the positives and knowing there's something out there. This is going to transform things in a good way. It might be a little bit difficult now, but in the next weeks and months, we'll have good things coming.
Oh, I believe that. I believe that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me again.
You're welcome.
And